This one's gonna be good. Hello and welcome back to the Craft Mansion. I'm David, and this week's video I'll be making Gimli's battle axe from Lord of the Rings. And yes, I'm excited for this one because, well, I love Lord of the Rings. A lot. So you might be asking, well, what is this? This will be actually my second remake video. I've already made Sting. I had an old Sting and I remade it, which you can find the video right here. And now I'm making this. Well, this is the old Gimli's axe, and I'll be remaking it with proper details. I want to remake all of these. I have lots of swords over there, which are, well, old, they're very crude like this, and I want to remake them. They're mainly from Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit, because I love Lord of the Rings. It is one of the greatest movies, books, franchises of all time, and I just love it. And I don't get why the movies are not that popular when compared to other franchises like Star Wars and Harry Potter, because, well, Lord of the Rings is the best thing that's ever been made. Okay? Even my videos, they tend to perform less when I do a Lord of the Rings video, because why don't you care about Lord of the Rings? So, okay, let's do this. If you would like to see more Lord of the Rings props, give this video a thumbs up, even from The Hobbit. So give it a thumbs up, and leave a comment down below with what you think I should do next from Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit. And the more that they're going to show the whole extended edition in theaters, and as a person who has never seen even the theatrical cut in theaters, this would be a huge treat. Okay, so now I'll stop ranting about Lord of the Rings because I've probably already annoyed you, so yeah, I'll stop. My dear fellowship of subscribers, well, I do hope you're a subscriber. As usual, I'll be starting off with a template. Now, for my video, I'll be using pictures and images I found online. But I'll make a template for you which you can access by contacting me on Facebook or Instagram. Now, I'll be making the main structure. I've already planned some stuff out. I'll be making the stick from a broomstick, but I need to cut this to the right length. Now, with my method and if my calculations are correct, this thing should be 91 centimeters. The end can be quite prickly, so I sanded it from where it was cut. To make sure the axe head was firm, the foam board needed support, so I marked two dots. One was 3.2 centimeters and the other 13.5 centimeters away from the end. These should correspond to the hollowed parts from the template. I drilled two holes with a 6mm diameter and tried to keep them as straight as possible. Now, of course, the handle has an octagonal cross section. I grabbed some 5mm thick foam board and cut a strip as long as the broomstick and 4 times as wide. Then, I further divided it into 4 equal parts. So mine divided it into 2.4cm thick strips. I didn't cut them all the way through, but only through the top layer of paper and the foam. This way the foam board could bend into 4 parts. On 2 opposing sides there should be 2 holes that correspond to those on the broomstick. I lined those up and glued the stick inside. I used a dowel to make sure the holes weren't out of line. In the meantime, I cut 4 more strips of foam board, as long as the broomstick, but this time only 7mm wide. These strips should be separate. I marked the middle and cut the strips into a triangular prism. These strips should fit in between the others to form the octagon. I measured the circumference of the whole thing using a scrap piece of foam, which turned out to be approximately 13 centimeters. I cut a piece of 2mm EVA foam, 30 centimeters by 21.3 centimeters, and marked the edges of the octagon. The length of this is really just the length of the template for the golden design. I cut into the foam, but not all the way through. I removed some of the foam from the inside so it could eventually be bent. In the templates, you have an indication of how long some of these lines need to be. I traced everything, but only used one box to trace all the others. It's just me being really lazy. I drew every detail by hand for these squares, but for the others, I poked holes in the corners and then joined those dots. The sets of 3 rectangles all need to be cut out. Where the foam was cut, I did contact glue, and when it was almost dry, I bent the foam to create a crisp edge on the outside. More contact glue on the inside and on the handle, and I could glue the first piece in place. Don't forget to reopen those holes. I made shallow cuts into all the details for later on. The bottom of the handle needed to be capped off, so I traced its shape onto foam board, cut it, and glued it. To conceal the foam, I used cardstock, which then I sanded down at the upper end. I cut a 13cm by 50.5cm strip of foam and then traced that all the way, repeating it several times. I poked holes and then joined the dots. I did get confused here and there, but still managed to keep track by first tracing the zigzag lines and then finishing the weave pattern. I don't have foam that's long enough, so I joined two parts like this. Then, I wrapped both of them around the handle, leaving 1cm free at the end. I also made shallow cuts on these lines. The top and bottom of this leather part are covered with gold. I used strips of foam 1.5cm wide. So now the handle is finished. Of course, there's still this part at the top that's missing, but I'll make that later on. And of course, you can see that there are two holes over here. And these holes need to be filled. That was a bad joke, sorry. These are actually here so that the axe head is stronger. I'll be using 6mm dowels to go through here, and of course then work, well, if they go through there, they should. Anyways, and then work this, make holes accordingly so it fits inside the dowels. I cut the two dowels, one being 120cm long, while the other 122. The shorter one goes on top. Make sure they are centered as both axe heads need to fit. I traced the template twice from each side onto 5mm foam board. Then I cut and traced the dowel placements, this time on the inside. I hollowed these out and shaped them to fit a dowel. I glued both halves together with white glue. The dowels still needed to be thinned at one end to fit the general shape of the axe. I traced the part that would eventually be covered with gold and removed the first layer of paper from everywhere except from the piece I had just traced. The whole thing tapers down, but still not to a sharp edge. Then I smoothed in the foam. I traced the line from where the bevel should start, and this is where I tapered the foam down to a sharp edge. I covered these areas with Mod Podge. There's another golden design that goes on the blade itself. I cut 4 rectangles and glued them onto the paper. This edge also needs to be sealed. Using the poking technique, I then joined the dots and formed the patterns. I traced this part 4 times, but added some extra thickness to it. Now this is why I had sealed the foam from before, because contact glue will eat the foam away. I thinned out the edge from the inside, and then glued it on the opposite layer. The parts weren't perfect, so I rechecked all the edges. Then I filled the holes with white glue, and the edge with contact glue, and fitted the new parts in place. The lines between each pair of squares should line up with the lines at the bottom of each triangle. So these are the plans for the pommel at the top of the axe. Now I know they're a bit confusing, they'll be more clearly in the final template. The thing I want to explain from the start is this part. So this is actually one part. Sorry for the paper, it was in a bag and I crushed it. So at the top, as you can see, the pommel tapers down into a smaller octagon. That's why it starts this size and then ends in this size. That's why it's 3A and 3B. For the rest, I'll explain while I'm doing the actual parts. I traced template 1 twice onto 2mm foam. Template 2 has different thicknesses. One should be 6mm and the other 8mm. Coincidentally, this floor mat foam is 1.4cm thick, so I could simply split it into 2. This is corrugated cardstock. I cut a thin strip of 6mm from it. It was perfect for the design of the pommel. It goes on the 6mm thick octagon. And now, it's a neat little sandwich between the two copies of template 1. An 8mm strip of foam should go around the 8mm thick octagon. I cut the edges at an angle for crisp edges. There's a lot of details in the pommel, I know. This particular strip has windows in it, which I drew on the template as well. This last part goes on top. For template 3A, you can either trace it or trace the end like this onto floor mat foam. After thinning it to be 1cm, I traced template 3B on top. I cut the bevels and sanded them using my Dremel tool. And these are the 3 parts that form the pommel. I drew these runes by hand, which I'll also be leaving in the template. Those lines need to be cut into as well. The handle is wood, so I added some wood texture to the exposed foam board. Now there's only really one step left before I paint the whole thing, and that is using my heat gun to both seal the foam and open up all these little cuts I did for the designs on the axe head, the pommel, and the handle over here. It's really cool. It's like seeing a time lapse of the foam opening up, but in real life. To prevent the foam board from melting, I covered it with cardboard. This part isn't necessary, but I chose to cover up the non-silver parts just to have a clean yellow base for the gold. I mean, yeah, some parts still got painted, but not that much. I mixed some brown, black and red for the wood at the center and at the bottom. Some really dark brown for the leather. Oh, and don't mind that whole line where both ends of the foam meet. In the movies that line is actually there since it's wrapped leather. I used a gold marker for these parts. I do have gold paint, but it's not that solid. I need to find some good gold and silver paints cause those markers will soon run out. Plus, they're not that convenient anyways. I used black shoe polish to fill in the wood grain and wiped off the excess from the surface. Water makes the polish a bit runnier. Here, I used brown. Now you may have noticed that I didn't seal these areas and the silver spray damaged the foam. But it was done on purpose. I know, right? The original replica is also textured and the shoe polish really makes a difference. The handle got entirely covered with watered down black paint to fill in the gaps of the pattern. For some final touches, I dry brushed some gold to make the edges stand out more. Dry brushing is a technique where you wipe off most of the paint, so you essentially paint with a dry paintbrush. Now, not only do we have Gimli's battle axe, but one that has been used and wielded for years. This video should have been out last week, but I took 2 weeks because I had some stuff to do and I also took a small break. If you follow me on Instagram, then you would know about these small updates. It's amazing to think that these movies are almost as old as I am. I mean, they're almost 20 years old. And to think of it, it's like it's a whole full circle because as this video comes out, I'll be finishing the first movie in cinema. 4 hours watching a movie at the cinema. There's going to be a huge line for the bathroom after the movie. It's amazing to see the past 7 years or so, where I went from the first prop I showed you at the beginning of the video to this. If you like this tutorial, please give this video a thumbs up and leave a comment down below what you think I should do next. And until next time, this is Gimli's X from The Lord of the Rings, I'm David, and this is the Craftmansion.
Let them come, there is one yet still... Let them come, there is one dwarf in Moria that... Let them come, there is one dwarf yet in Moria who still draws breath.
Snaqalleċ fidil.